Guys, for the better part of the last 6 years of my involvement in the high ticket sales industry, selling full time for 8, 9, 10 plus different offers, I have spent thousands of hours on sales calls with prospects ranging from B2C prospects selling, 5K training programs, whether it's helping someone start a business or break into cybersecurity or help investors invest their money the best way and most efficiently in property, in real estate investing, or as high as 30K, yearly masterminds where, we would help higher level, more sophisticated entrepreneurs that are somewhat decently successful, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500K a month, and they're looking to get that extra leg up and get that much better and build and grow their business. I have spoken to a very wide list and varying range of, different prospects. So I've learned a lot, I've picked up a lot, and I've made a lot of mistakes in my time. And from what I've seen of the hundreds of people that I've coached to navigate and transition into this industry to get to 10K a month, there's been a lot of really clear things that if you knew about them coming in this industry, you'd be able to do a lot better, a lot faster. So what I want to do is just give you a full insight to some of the lessons I've learned over the last 6+ years so that you don't have to spend the time that I did taking thousands of hours of sales calls, and you can kind of just get the lessons served to you on a silver platter. So let's get into it. The first one on this list is super simple, which is that your sales calls are way too long, right? This is super overlooked. And if your calls go longer than 45 minutes, you are absolutely doing something wrong. From my personal experience, when I have a sales call that is an hour beyond, there's very little likelihood chance that it closes, or my closing rate dips significantly. The reason why is the prospect doesn't remember, let alone I don't remember what I said, 30, 40, 50 minutes ago. So the emotional pull that you have on a prospect when you condense the timeline of a sales call is way more stronger and way more potent when you keep it between 30 to 45 minutes. When you get it along beyond an hour, you are putting yourself in a bad spot and you're shooting yourself in the foot. In fact, this is the number one reason why most people get think about objections, because you overwhelm the prospect with so much information. They have a lot of things to think about, and they do need to generally go digest the information you've given them because you've asked them so many questions and probably presented your solution for way too long. So keep your calls more condensed, more short. And if you can't get your sales calls done during that time, it is simply a lack of skill or understanding what is productive versus interesting information. And to know the difference between the two, you need to have a strategy and the way that you operate your sales call and not have it just loosey-goosey. You ask whatever questions where you want to ask them. So next one on the list has lost me a lot of deals to date and took me a long time to learn. And it comes back to the same quote, which is that a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So that's from Dale Carnegie. And if you want to remember this more easily, I've got another quote from my mentor, which is that what you say is trash, what the prospect says is gospel. So an all too common mistake that most sales reps make is that they try to influence the prospect and be persuasive by telling them how they need to think, reframing their worldview by telling them how they need to do things and how they need to change and why they should change, objection handling by telling them that they need to do it, and then, blah, 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 and, telling them, why they're the best company in the market, all these type of things. They try to push these ideas on a prospects rather than letting the prospect come up with that on their own terms as if it was their own idea in the first place. Let me give you an example. If a prospect asks you, why are you the best company in this industry and you're better than your competitors? What makes you different? What separates you? Or, why should I trust you as a whole? If you meet them with a response of like, here's why we're the best and here's our long list of track record and this, that, and another thing, rather than approaching it with a question by question dynamic, it's going to go in one ear and out the other, because what is every other salesperson saying? We are the best. We are amazing. We have all this long track record. We have all the results. You sound the exact same as every other salesperson that they've probably spoken to either in the past for other products, problems, and solutions, or they're most likely assessing you against multiple other salespeople for the solution that you provide. So turn your statements into questions, and you're going to become way more influential, persuasive, and convincing. Trust me. If you're trying to tell someone that they should do something or they should change, or they have to think this way, or why you are the best, You are fighting against human behavior and human psychology. You are literally pushing against the grain. So as I said before, turn your statements into questions and you will become way more influential and persuasive to than that of salespeople that try to push ideas against the prospect or push ideas onto the prospect or try to convince them that they need to do something, whether it be objection handling, discovery, or even just selling them on your solution. You need to ask more questions so you become more persuasive. The next one here is understanding the very clear difference between external urgency versus internal urgency. And there's a very clear difference between the two. And if you're constantly placing and trying to engineer artificial urgency in your sales calls, you are absolutely shooting yourself in the foot. Now, in most cases, this is the case. I know certain offers and certain industries, it can work sort of a bit better than without it. But if you're trying to drop fast action bonuses, so, this program is usually $15,000 and outside of these calls because I think you're special, and I'm going to give it to you for $10,000 today. This is a terrible way to sell and a terrible way to create urgency. In most cases, this is going to end up backfiring massively and again, shooting yourself in the foot and creating a ton of sales resistance and a ton of sales pressure that is absolutely not necessary. Whereas instead, asking questions to get the prospect to understand what is the true urgency of what happens if they don't change or find a solution to their problem. For example, what would happen if this were to continue and you weren't able to solve this bottleneck for your business and be able to get consistent and quality of lead flow for your business so you can grow the business in the way that you'd like, right? There's a lot of downwards effects to the prospect in whatever instance and context it might be. They might not be able to provide for their family in the way they want to or have a lifestyle that they want to. There's a myriad of reasons. They may not be able to provide for their parents. There's a myriad of reasons and intentions as to why someone might need to solve a problem quickly. And we need to get the prospect to understand that themselves rather than just trying to tell them that there's a fast action, take a discount, or that they're special so they get a special price if they make a decision today on this call. Because by the way, the moment they get off that call, you're obviously going to sell them for 10K if they come back to you 48 hours later. So it's a huge incongruency and you're basically lying to the prospect and it's just a no bueno and it's not the best way to go. The next one is a bit controversial as it's a massive trend that a lot of sales trainers are talking about these days, which is the method or the ideology philosophy of scriptless selling. Personally, I think scriptless selling is stupid. And it makes no sense. And that's just my opinion, right? It's just an opinion. But from my personal perspective and my own experience, it is massively setting you back in sales if you're doing this. And I'm going to tell you why. I had a client of mine that I'm working quite intensively one-on-one with at the moment. And he went from making 10 to 12K a month, 14K a month, I think was his highest month, but average is 10 to 12, down to like 2 to 3K a month, closing at 20 to 25%. What seemed like overnight. And I'd ask, what did he change? Was there anything different that he changed? And he couldn't put his finger on it. But he completely changed his whole philosophy around sales to go from the way that I had taught him, which was consistent, predictable, and rinse and repeat process that he could follow, day in, day out, to, he saw in an Instagram reel one day that he should just, do what is basically off gut feeling, selling off intuition, and basically what he feels in that given moment would be best to ask a prospect, which to me is ridiculous. In a sport that can be inconsistent, which is that of sales, you really want to make this arena as consistent as you possibly can be. And the way that you do that is by having a process that you follow, that you are confident and that works. Let me tell you, if you go to a entrepreneur in the info space that do 7 figures a month, 8 figures plus a year, and they say, hey, I just want to, do things based off how I feel on the day, and I want to ask questions off intuition, they'll just fire you instantly. They have a process that they have found has worked, and they might have a bit of variation based off each sales rep with their own personal touch to things, but 80%, 90% is going to be the same. And it's because it's what works. And it is what is required to be consistent at this game. And if you're trying to reinvent the wheel, ask different questions, different words, different phrasing, different tones, you could be making 15K a month. And then, like I said in that example, 2K a month the next. This also creates a lot of strain on your brain if you're taking 8+ sales calls a day. if you're trying to, ask all these different questions and not have a repeatable, dependable process that you consistently rely upon that gets you consistent results. This last point will come off as a little bit blunt, and that's because it needs to, which is that you are most likely probably being too soft, too passive, and too neutral on your sales calls. The reason is a lot of salespeople view rejection or resistance or pressure that, you might feel like you're putting on a prospect as a bad thing. In some instances, it is, but if you're doing it the right way, you are doing your job correctly, right? Your job is to get rejected. Your job is to push people. Your job is to put them in an uncomfortable position to make an uncomfortable decision, right? That is what your job is, right? Your whole purpose as a sales rep is to get people out of their own way and do the uncomfortable thing that is ultimately going to change their life in whatever else it is that you solve with your solution. And so more often than not, and I know this from personal experience, as well as, a lot of the guys that I coach, train, and develop, is that they are not holding themselves to a high enough standard, but more importantly, their prospects to a high enough standard, and they're not challenging limiting beliefs, limiting language, objections, and they shy away and they veer away from, doing the hard things in sales, but that's ultimately where you're going to get the best results. Right? Not feeling like you're putting pressure on someone, not like you're forcing someone to do something, but holding up the mirror and holding, again, your prospect to a higher level of standard. That is what you are there to do. That is your job as a sales representative. And I feel more oftentimes than not, most salespeople really, really lack this because, again, I think they're probably just thinking that what they're doing is maybe a disservice, or they don't want to put too much pressure on someone. You are doing people a disservice if you're not showing up as a leader that you need to be on sales calls with your prospects and challenging their way of decision making and where they are right now. Because otherwise, if you don't, you are the person that is ultimately responsible for them staying in the position that they're in, because you haven't done a good enough job of convincing them or getting them to persuade themselves as to why they need to change. So there you have it, guys. There are some of my biggest lessons and learnings and some of the biggest mistakes that I see most sales reps making when they come into this industry. This is all learned from personal experience, by the way, and is all my personal opinion from what I have seen has worked for myself and, the clients that I coach and work with. So hopefully you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.